Welcome into another edition of the Gig'em 24/7 Sports Podcast. I am Andrew Hattersley, joined by Carter Carls. The football season is nearly here. This is our last Saturday, Carter, until uh, December, basically, without college football. And so, great to have you guys with us. And kickoff is again 8 days away as we record this on Friday afternoon. Welcome in, Carter. How you doing, buddy?
Good, man. 24 hours away. I'm ready,
Yep.
man. It's everyone craps on week 0. I get it. Like, the games aren't great, but come on, man. It's better than nothing, right?
Florida State and Georgia Tech. That's an ACC matchup to start out the year. There's some other games throughout the day as well, and it's football on the TV, right? And it's kind of a taste of what's to come the week after. And A&M will start out with a big one against Notre Dame. College game day coming to town, a huge recruiting weekend. We're gonna get into that and have plenty more coming over the next week on that. Before we get to that, some notable news yesterday that you were at as we record this on Friday. On Thursday, Texas A&M and Texas held a press conference to announce that Cotton Holdings would be taken over would be joining as the sponsor for the game. You were at the press conference. Just, it was kind of an interesting press conference. We had Chris Delcani there, Trev Alberts was there, R.C. Slocum was there. What did you kind of take away from the event?
Well, first of all, it was a really funny atmosphere because I don't know if you could tell it on the video, but it felt like you were in an Abercrombie mixed with a nightclub. Like, the lighting,
the music,
and the light and the music was like what you'd hear in an Abercrombie. I felt like I was in 7th grade with my mom shopping for jeans again at Hollister. Like, that's what the vibe felt like. And I don't know if that's what they're going for or what. Like, I felt like, hey, two teams, maybe you go for more of the country vibe. But so I thought that was pretty funny. But as far as the event, it was also interesting. It probably could have been an email. I kept kind of joking about that. But, hey, you get both ADs in a room. I'll be there. And R.C. Slocum was there. Obviously, this is something that you look at the future of college athletics and probably pivoting to revenue sharing. You're going to need to find creative ways to add revenue streams to your athletic department. And so this is what Trev Alberts said is a 3-year deal. They have flexibility to kind of be beyond that. And some of the details of it have not quite been released, but you'd figure that it's in the 7 figures, in probably the low millions for both schools. They both have NIL attached to it, funding both NIL funds at both schools. So this is something that, hey, man, like, this is the future. So I don't think anyone should shy away from this. I think it's a smart move. Couple other things, I thought it was interesting just hearing both athletic directors talk about how much they want this game to be played every year. Really, before this, when Texas was in the Big 12, there was this weird game of chicken going on between the athletic directors, where it's like, we want to say we care about it, but not that much. So, and it's, some athletic directors some years say, oh, we don't want to play this game, and oh, we don't need them. And now they're finally admitting, hey, this is a great game. The fans are going to love it. This could be one of the best. Trev Alberts said he thinks it'll be the best rivalry in college football. So it was refreshing to hear that. They both said that they want this game to be played on Black Friday night going forward. Going to be a Saturday this year. 118 all-time meetings, 72 of them have been on Thanksgiving. So moving to Friday would be pretty interesting. The reason for that is because you look at the NFL schedule now. They have 3 games on Thanksgiving, and they dominate the ratings. So having a game on Thanksgiving is asking for lesser ratings than maybe a primetime spot on Black Friday. So that's kind of the reason there. This partnership, this sponsorship, it's supposed to cover every sport at A&M Texas. There's supposed to be a trophy that's awarded to either team depending on kind of a point system. So, not only the head-to-head matchups, but for some of the sports like that A&M might have, that Texas doesn't have, like equestrian. They're going to have to. They haven't released the point system yet, but they're going to come up with a way to have a way to kind of determine a champion by the end of the year. So a lot of little details there. I think a lot of people were going into it thinking, man, is this going to be moved to a neutral site? Is this game going to be on Thanksgiving every year? Like, what are they going to announce? And when they heard Cotton Holdings is a sponsor, and that was kind of the big news, they kind of tuned out and said, yeah, I don't really care about that anymore. But I understand that. But I think the other news, the NIL component of it, the game being played on Fridays, the point system and the trophy, I think all those things are definitely worth, and will make this rivalry game all that more interesting. So it kind of felt weird doing it before the season, and you got Notre Dame to focus on, and Texas has Colorado State to focus on. I think at the end of the day, this is the kind of sponsorship that you're going to see more and more in college athletics.
No doubt, and I think you kind of heard Trev Alberts mention that, and then we're gonna turn our focus towards the season in a minute as well. Kind of take some big picture items, but you did hear Trev Alberts kind of talk about that revenue sharing component, and that you've got to find ways to kind of add some revenue to your department, whether it's a concert over the summer, a soccer game, those sorts of things. You've got to find a way to kind of add revenue where you can for that reason. And the neutral site part, it was funny. Chris Delcani obviously made the joke that the game was being moved to Dallas, and paused for a second before saying he was joking, because he had some people kind of go back and forth with him on Twitter about it. That was kind of what I took away from it as well, is how much both athletic directors kind of stressed the importance of this game being played. Both kind of talked about it being on Friday. They both kind of steered away from talking about future, if it's going to be played every single year or how that's going to work out. I think Trevor Alberts kind of said that hadn't been figured out, and Chris Delcani kind of said the same, saying, that he wants to be played every year, but there's got to be room for debate on, do you have more than one rival? And A&M kind of didn't. I think Trev Alberts kind of talked about, you don't want A&M having to pick what rival is their actual rival, and same goes for Texas. So couple notable takeaways there as well. And I did, I did take note of the part about the year-round competition too, and how they want to incorporate this into other sports as well. Obviously, volleyball in late September will be the first matchup between these two programs. That will take place at Texas A&M. Football in late November, around Thanksgiving, during Thanksgiving weekend, and then obviously A&M will travel to face Texas in baseball next spring, and also A&M basketball will host Texas to begin SEC play. So those are a couple of the matchups between Texas and Texas A&M to kind of take note of. Looking ahead to the season, this is obviously, there's all eyes are going to kind of be on Mike Elko, right? First season coming in, there's a lot of expectations. A&M ranked 7th in the 24/7 Sports Team Talent Composite rating, are ranked inside the top 25, and Notre Dame comes to town, and it's a chance to make a big statement off the bat. And before we get into Notre Dame and the schedule, just what has been your impression of Mike Elko's first offseason? Kind of what's maybe impressed you about what he's done, and what you've taken away from what you've seen from him?
Well, I think depending on the hire and depending on how that hire did over his first few months and really the stretch of the offseason, this could have either been a rebuild or like a regroup, right? And I think with what Mike Elko has done is it's a regroup. I think that he's done a remarkable job, not only keeping a lot of the top guys on his roster from entering the portal. Yet, you had a couple big losses: Evan Stewart, Walter Nolan. You can mention, a couple other guys, LT Overton, but you felt like the real stars on this team: Connor Wigman, Shamar Stewart, in York, Noah Thomas, right? Like a lot of the top guys came back, and then you supplement that with what he did in the portal. Now, you brought in almost 25 guys. Half of them might play, right? But so it's not like every single one of those guys are going to be incredible guys, but a nice blend of star power, potential, and depth. Really, just overall filling the holes on the roster. And I've talked about it a lot. Just this cornerback group last year was totally lost and just downright abysmal. I mean, you think back to the Ole Miss game, and my goodness, you could have lined up and got 2 yards with the cornerbacks that they had out there. And like,
is that a comment on my ability?
No, it's
No,
not
I'm
an
just
insult. We
just
know that you
teasing.
can burn anybody. But no, the guys that they reloaded that group with, though, again, a blend of depth, star power, and potential. Potential, like a guy like Des Ricks, former 5-star recruit, really flashes when you watch him. Brings a lot of impressive length and physical intangibles. But then other guys like Will Lee, who have experience at Kansas State and was the highest rated player on that defense on PFF last year. So, brought in 10 newcomers secondary. This is a staff looked position by position and said, what do we need? And not only retaining the important guys, but bringing in either a guy like Nick Scorton, right, a star power guy, or sort of a potential guy or a depth piece. So, yeah, I just felt like this could have really gone sideways. We've heard Mike Elko talk about this before. This could have been something where they lose Connor Wigman, they lose Shamar Stewart, they don't get Nick Scorton, and then all of a sudden this is a 6-6 team, and my goodness, they squandered an easy schedule. But because of what they did, you look at this, I say easy, a more favorable than usual schedule. It's not a rebuild. This is a team that could really contend for the playoff because of that work. So you got to give Mike Elko a lot of props. Should also talk about just the culture change in this on this team from a discipline and accountability perspective. I think if you looked at where this team was at when he inherited it, everybody had a foot in the transfer portal. Everybody was showing up late to meetings. Everybody didn't care. If it was voluntary, that means they didn't have to show up, right? Now there is a real, we got to show up to every workout. We got to show up on time to every meeting. We got to hold guys accountable. Whether that'll translate to immediate crazy success, we'll see. But he put them in about as best of a position as he could have.
Carter, I think back to, when the two of us obviously went to the first practice of the spring, right? And you mentioned the discipline aspect of it. You knew it was going to take some time, right? You knew A&M had 15 practices and that, we were going to see where they were going to go coming out of the spring. But just in the first couple of minutes of the way they took the practice field and the way we noted it in our notes at that time, that it was going to come down to attention to detail. It was going to come down to lining up correctly, getting off the field correctly. Some of those little things. Looking back on it, that's kind of how this offseason's played out. It's come down to, attending workouts, being on time to meetings. You've heard Mike Elko say a couple times, and I've kind of taken note. I don't think you can get a good read on what a team's going to look like, right, until they get out on the field and they face Notre Dame. They probably have a good idea of what offensive and defensively. But he's mentioned a couple times that they've gotten a lot better in terms of practice habits and the tempo of the practice and how they move between stuff. And I think that's been one of the notable things of the off season for me, because we kind of got to see the first practice of the off season and it was right off the bat. They were not happy with the way guys were lining up, the way guys were getting off the field. And it kind of started with that. And looking back on it now, I think you're seeing, at least in the way the staff is kind of talking about it, it feels like they're a lot more confident in where they are from that standpoint, the effort standpoint, and some of those things that they had to start at the base. Even though they brought back a lot of talent, they had to start at the base, and they had to start with those sorts of corrections and then go from there.
Yeah, and like there were still some bad apples on the team, and you saw them weed them out in the spring. I mean, it was like a dawn of a new era. It was like, you're off the team, right? Like you're no longer on the roster. You're going to the portal. Like you saw some guys where you looked at the online roster and they all of a sudden didn't show up anymore. And, we're not going to name names, but there was kind of a reason for that, right? And I think that there was definitely this sense of like, okay, we might give you one strike. We might, feel it out at first, but if this is a pattern and if this is, we don't team anymore. We don't care what your recruiting rating is and how much your NIL is and all that kind of stuff. I mean, some of the guys that were shown the door, former 4- and 5-star recruits, right? And so I think that was the other important thing of like, if you don't have your act together and if you're not showing up on time, if you're supposed to look at film and you're not looking at it, like that's the kind of thing that this staff just won't put up with. And so, we saw it right away in the spring, and I think the actions have matched those words too, where we've seen it play out. And Elko mentioned it at the beginning of preseason camps, and just a workout over the summer, and whether that's like 100% true. I mean, you think, well, did somebody miss it for one reason,
Yeah, right.
Like you got to think it's accurate, right? So it's like, man, that was definitely not the case over the last few years. So very impressive.
No doubt. And now they start to turn their schedule, their eye towards the schedule, right? And things really get underway next week with Notre Dame and a big matchup right off the bat that's depending on who you talk to this offseason, kind of talked about a faceless opponent and some of that sort of stuff. But it does help having Notre Dame right off the bat and just to kind of have that circled as the game you're going to start out with. When you look at this schedule, and we're going to get into with the 12-team playoff what that means for Texas A&M, but if you look at 1 to 2 games on this schedule, are there games that stand out to you that could be potential swing games or games that could he decide this one way or another, the way things shake out for A&M?
Yeah, everyone talks about the 4 big games, right? The 4 best opponents on the schedule are Notre Dame, Missouri, LSU, Texas. I'll try to go away from those, but I have to mention Notre Dame number 1, because if you start that off with a win, all of a sudden you're looking at it and you're saying, man, you just got to win 1 out of those 3 remaining big games and take care of business. And 10-2 gets you in the playoff, you'd think.
Yeah.
So I think winning that Notre Dame game, not only from that standpoint, but just a recruiting and hype and confidence standpoint, you win that game, and all of a sudden you're like, hey, you just beat the number 7 team in the country. You can beat anybody on the schedule, right? And so I think that game would mean a world for doing that. I'll try to go away from the other 3 and just kind of cherry pick a couple. Florida and Auburn are really interesting to me because I think I look at those teams and I would say they're probably 6-6. Florida, you look at that schedule, might be 4-8, might be 5-7. Maybe the hardest schedule in college football history. But with Florida, you're getting them early in the year at Florida. I don't like that. Actually, you come off a Notre Dame win and you're starting to feel yourself a little. Like we saw what happened with this team when they went to Miami last year, where I think a lot of people expected them to win that game because Miami kind of in a similar spot, really had been struggling and really had a lot of pressure to win that game. I think this might be the game that Florida circles on their schedule and says, if we want to turn things around, we got to win this game. And I think they're going to throw the kitchen sink at A&M because of that. And so that's the kind of game that if you're really looking at, hey, how far has this program come since last year? That's a game like they should have beaten Miami last year. I'm not saying like they should have because of one play or two plays. I'm just saying like where this program was, they should have been good enough to beat them, but they had all sorts of issues, right? This time, you'd like to think that they can beat Florida, but they haven't shown it yet. Like this is a new program, new coaching staff, a lot of new players. Can they come together and win a game that they're expected to on the road? Auburn's the other one I mentioned just because we've seen A&M go to Auburn the last couple times and how challenging that can be. Hugh Freeze, I mean, I'll say it again, like Peyton Thorne, I'm not really concerned about him, but the future of this program with the level they're recruiting at, some of the guys they already have in, it's not a team to really mess around with. And they really gave Connor Wigman troubles last year before he got hurt. But really maybe the biggest thing to point out is it comes right before the Texas game. So you just think about trap games, right? Like, could this be a trap game where you're 9-2 or you're 8-2 and you think, man, all you got to do now is beat Texas and you're in the playoff, and then you lose to Auburn and the Texas game doesn't even matter anymore. So that's a game where, again, has the team matured enough to where they don't overlook opponents? We saw it a lot under Jimbo where they'd show up against Bama and they'd show up against LSU, but then they'd play one of the Mississippi schools or Auburn or Arkansas and it'd lay a big fat lard, right? And so like they gotta show up for those kind of games, and so that's why I'm kind of looking at those saying, hey, they should win this, but will they?
And the thing I would kind of add to that on the Auburn front, right? You talk about when you get teams and that sort of thing. Florida being early, you mentioned it. That's a game they've kind of got circled already as one that they've got to win. If that schedule's hard enough, they look at A&M at home and think, man, if we want to get to a bowl game, like that's a game we got to have. And I think your other point about Auburn is spot on. The other part that kind of strikes me about that roster, you look at that receiver room, there's some kind of young receivers, right? And this was kind of brought up a lot when it came to Texas A&M, especially with that talented 2022 class, is look out late in the year. You look at, a Cam Coleman, who was obviously committed to Texas A&M at one point, kind of late in the year, once you've had the chance to kind of go through and as you see schedule, how is he starting to settle in and kind of get the speed of the game in the SEC and where is he at that point? And so that's just one example. And when one guy, they've got they put together a really talented Hugh Freeze has done a really nice job kind of restocking the cupboard in terms, especially on the offensive side of the ball. And I look at that receiver room and kind of what they did there. And that's the one thing that strikes me about that game. You're right. Going to Auburn is not an easy place to play. South Carolina is going to be really motivated. They're in need of a really big win. So there's some sneaky games on the schedule outside of some of the road trips are going to be pretty sneaky in terms of difficulty. I know a lot does get talked about kind of the 4 home games, but some of those road games are a little sneaky. And on just on the playoff front and to kind of play off of that, what do you feel like A&M needs to do to get to the playoff? And is it 9-3? Is it 10-2? Is it kind of dependent on who those 3 losses are to? What do you kind of feel about what Texas A&M needs to do to get to the playoff?
Yeah, this is an educated guess because it's the first year of the 12-team playoff. We don't quite know, but we do know that there are a lot of good teams in the SEC, belongs to the Big Ten, and then you're going to have, probably a Big 12 team that runs the table. Maybe goes 11-1. ACC, Florida State's looking pretty good this year. Clemson will be contending, and then you got sort of the group of 5 schools that are could potentially snag a spot too. So 9-3, I think, is not going to get you in. You'd have to have a lot go in your favor. I think 10 to get you in, but what if a whole bunch of teams go 10-2? SEC's got 6 teams now. What if 6 teams go 10-2 or higher? Or again, my math is not great, so that might be impossible. But 4 or 5, what if they go 10-2, and then 4 and 5, and the Big Ten go 10-2 or higher? So I think you got to go at least 10-2 and have a couple nice wins. You got to probably split your 4 hard games and take care of the rest of the business. You wouldn't have a boss, right? Like you'd probably, your only 2 losses would be to the ranked teams, and then you'd have a couple wins over ranked teams, and so I'm thinking 10-2. Beating Notre Dame helps you a great deal because margin for error would be a little bit better for you. Where, okay, if you slip up against Missouri or LSU, you don't want to go into it where in October you already have 2 losses, and now it's like you got to run the table. But so I'm thinking 10-2, and we'll go more into just the roster and maybe what they need to do, but just record wise, that's kind of what I'm thinking.
I think 10-2 as well. And Josh Pay, we're working on getting him on the show at some point, but I was listening to him a couple weeks ago, and he kind of made the point is, if you get into the 9-3 range, and this is where the 12-team playoff is going to get kind of tricky, is if there's a 9-3 SEC team and a 10-2 Big 12 team per se, or 10-2 ACC team, does the 9-3 team get in over the 10-2 team, depending on who the 3 losses are to, and that's going to be tricky. And so if you want to really if you really want to feel comfortable, I think 10-2 probably gets the job done, especially given some of the opponents A&M has coming in and some of the opponents they have on their schedule. I think 10-2 in an SEC schedule probably gets the job done. I agree with you there. And as long as you kind of avoid any bad losses on the schedule, I think 10-2 is probably what you have to get to truly feel safe. We're going to take a quick break, and then we're going to take a look at the roster standpoint and kind of the strengths and weaknesses of this team and plenty more right after a quick break. Welcome back into the Gig'em 24/7 Sports Podcast. I am Andrew Hattersley, joined by Carter Carls. Carter, it's time to get into some team specific questions. When you look at this roster and then this team, having a chance to see him, obviously there's some uncertainty, right? You haven't seen him. We haven't seen him in a lot of extended settings yet. Haven't seen him play an opponent yet. But if you had to kind of make an assumption right now or assessment, what do you think the biggest strength on this team is right now?
Got to be the defensive line, right? I mean, You look up front and you might have 3 first round, maybe top 50, top 75 picks on it. And Shamar Stewart, Shamar Turner, and Nick Scorton. We all know what Nick Scorton can do. Led the Big Ten in sacks, and second team All Big Ten. And honestly, just comparing him to last season, it looks better than he was last season. So I don't know if he's I've kind of gone back and forth. I don't know if he's a top 10 pick just because I don't know if he would, test as well as, a Myles Garrett, those kind of guys. But I do think he definitely has the look of a first-round pick in the 2025 draft and could lead the SEC in sacks and be all-world again. The 2 guys I'm kind of looking at, though, Shamar Turner, Shamar Stewart, I want to talk about them real quick. Shamar Stewart had 1.5 sacks last year, and you look at that and you kind of go, okay, whatever. But if you really look at the tape, he could have had 8 sacks easily. Yep. A lot of tackles where he just whiffed the shoelace and couldn't get the guy down, or he ran into his teammate at the last second, the quarterback threw it away at the last second. He was very, very close. I had a story about it a couple weeks ago, of just like 6 different clips of how close he was. And certainly, what's the expression? Close only counts in horseshoes and
hand grenades, I think.
grenades. Yeah, they're right. So, but you talk to him, and he's real ambitious this year. Wants to get 15 plus sacks. If he can get half of that, it'd be amazing, right?
Yep.
And he does look leaner. He does look faster, quicker. So can he get half a step, maybe a fourth a step faster to where he can finish those plays? I think he will. I think he's a 6+, 7+ sack guy this year and could really work his way up draft boards. Jamar Turner, I want to mention him because we already know that he's great. Second team All-SEC last year, 6 sacks, one of the best players on this team coming back. And but he's moving to defensive tackle. And you ask him, you ask the people around him, you ask Mike Elko, you ask Jay Bateman, they'll say that defensive tackle is the best position for him, the kind of the most natural position for him. But not only that, in talking with the people around Jamar Turner, he played the second half of last season with torn labrum and a shin injury. And he ended up getting off-season surgery on it. And so he was out of position, one shoulder, one leg, and he still had 6 sacks and was second team All-SEC. So what's going to happen when he goes to his natural position and is healthy, and not only that, is motivated to raise that draft stock? Now, is he going to be a very good run defender? That's the question. Kind of undersized for the position relative to McKinley Jackson and those types. But could he be really awesome there? Absolutely. I think especially on those third and longs where you can move him around the defensive line, I think he's going to have a huge, especially playing next to the guys he's playing next to. And that's the other key. Not all of the focus is going to be each of those guys. So I think the sky's the limit. The other question with them, it looks like Albert Regis is trending to be the starter next to Jamar Turner. He's kind of had a battle with DJ Hicks there this offseason. I think a lot of people thought Hicks would be the starter there, and it's just pushing there. Can that group hold up against the run? I think that's the question. But purely from a standpoint of depth, star power, pass rush, sacks, tackles for a loss, this is going to be about as elite of a group as you can find. The only question is kind of what they will do against the run.
No question. And another guy I would mention that kind of got mentioned quite a bit by Jay Bateman and looks to be having a strong camp is Rodas Johnson. Was kind of a quiet pickup out of Wisconsin. But Jay Bateman has mentioned him a couple of times and pressers, and that he's really come on this fall camp, and that'd be big just from in terms of the interior depth. Joshua Saliskar is another one, UCF transfer, and then Cassius Howell. How they use him is going to be really interesting, and I think it was you who asked about Cassius Howell earlier this fall camp, and Jay Bateman said he's going to play a ton, and they kind of have some different ideas for how they're going to use him. So I just think the versatility and the combinations that they have. Gabriel Brownlow-Dindy, he's got to stay healthy. If he's he just hasn't been able to stay healthy, and I know we get asked about him a lot, and that's kind of the key for him, is being able to stay healthy and stay on the field. And if you get an impact out of him, you get an impact out of DJ Hicks, you're suddenly sitting in a really good spot. So now moving to the other side, biggest question mark or biggest weakness you see with this team right now?
I think in broad terms, the offense is kind of a question because they have a few different questions. If you look kind of top of them, I think receiver is a concern because I don't think they have that number one option, and drops have been an issue for this group. You look at Noah Thomas. I think that's the guy you look at and say this could be the number one receiver for this group. But dating back to high school, the guy has really struggled to be healthy. So can you string together a full season of health? Jahdae Walker, Cyrus Allen, two other of the top receivers in the group, they've struggled with drops over the years. Jahdae led the team with center. Allen's had, drop issues at Louisiana Tech. They lost the guy that they thought could potentially be their number one receiver in Jabre Barber, the Troy transfer. So it's a group where they got to find somebody who can break out. Can it be Noah Thomas? Could it be a freshman and Terry Bussey? Micah Tease had a couple big practices. So you got some guys who can flash, but can they put it all together for the length of the season? Terry Bussey will certainly be the one to watch. Then you have the O-line questions, right? Terrible group over the last couple seasons. A lot of starting lineup combinations. A lot of injury. And I think you feel pretty good about the left side, Trey Zune, Chase Masonis, very quality starters that you can have there. But what happens at right tackle will kind of dictate how good the O-line is, because they've kind of tinkered. You see Reed Adams there. You see Fothery there. They've seen Mark Naboo slide to right guard when Reed Adams slides to right tackle. So they've kind of tinkered that, and this deep into camp, or that deep into camp with them tinkering that kind of concerned me. Running back, we'll talk about Ruben Owens going down later, but when you look at the skill positions, tight end, running back, wide receiver, there's not a lot of just, oh, that's a superstar, oh, that's an NFL player. None of the receivers had more than 700 yards in the season. None of the running backs have had 600 or more yards in the season. None of the tight ends have had more than 400 yards in the season. Now, I'm not trying to be doom and gloom, because you still have Connor Wigman at quarterback, and you still have a pretty promising offensive coordinator in Colin Klein. And so I think this group can figure it out. I don't think it's wise to expect that they're going to be this high-flying offense that's going to put up a ton of points. Now, when you have a defense as strong as theirs, maybe all you got to do is, methodically move the ball down the field, be really good on third down, limit turnovers, limit penalties, and that's all you need. You just need an above-average offense with how strong this defense can be. But there are concerns for sure.
No doubt. And you mentioned Ruben Owens, and that's where we're going to head to next. Is probably the one big blow that we've kind of heard about so far in fall camp. Mike Elko talked about it this past weekend at Saturday's media day. A foot injury expected to keep him out most, if not all, of the 2024 season. Left the door open if A&M were to play deeper into the season. They could get him back, but right now, at least going to play most of the season without Ruben Owens, and it's a blow, right? It's a former 5-star running back who put together a pretty good freshman year, and there was kind of a hope that maybe he took that next step. Was rated as one of the top running backs in his class, and honestly, the top two running backs from that class are now out for the year or out for an extended period when you look at him and CJ Baxter at Texas. So kind of one of the big storylines from fall camp. But you look at this group, right? And if there's one blessing in disguise from last year, it's how balanced this room was, right? You look at Ruben Owens, you look at Amari Daniels and Le'Veon Moss, all of them had 96 or more carries. And so if you're A&M, you lean probably more heavily on Le'Veon Moss and Amari Daniels. You brought in EJ Smith this offseason out of the transfer portal out of Stanford. Kind of how do you think A&M's equipped to deal with this injury, and how does this kind of affect them?
It's not a huge injury for now. It could be later if they lose another guy, because I think they look at that group and they say, hey, all three of these guys were going to be contributors regardless. You probably felt best about Le'Veon Moss leading the group, even with Owens healthy, because last year, from what we watched, Moss was the best running back of that group. He just struggled to be healthy, and didn't come on until maybe the middle part of the season. But a few games in, from that point forward, he looked like the best back. I think, the concern is the depth because they want to use a running back by committee. And I think all three running backs can serve a specific purpose. I think you have Moss, kind of your lead guy. E.J. Smith, maybe more of your third down back. He's kind of the best receiving back out of the group. And then Amari Daniels getting kind of the other work. I think you can work with that. But I look at this group, and Le'Veon Moss dealt with injuries the last couple of years. E.J. Smith has been injury-prone his whole career. Moss has been kind of a guy who's run straight up and kind of invites the contact a little bit. They got to stay healthy because three running backs, okay, but if all of a sudden one of them gets hurt and you've only got one or two scholarship backs, that's when you're really in trouble. So Owens, he wasn't going to be a Doak Walker Award winner. He wasn't going to be a 1,000-yard rusher this year. He was good. He's a very promising young back, no doubt about it. But it's not like it's a huge loss. It's just the depth component that kind of concerns me.
No doubt. And one other note on that was Mike Elko did obviously say he wasn't ready to kind of share them, but did say they are discussing behind the scenes, what if X and X happens, where would they kind of go? And there's some guys that have experience playing running back on this roster if it were to go that direction. Obviously, Dalton Brooks was prolific in that regard in high school. He's in a battle right now for one of the safety spots. So how does that kind of shake out? And then Javon Thomas was another one that played running back for South Oak Cliff during their state title run. And so kind of a couple guys, if things were to, if you were to see another injury, who potentially could be some emergency options, those are probably two guys that at least behind the scenes we discussed. Not sure who Mike Elko and the staff has discussed on that front, but those are two guys that could be names that come to mind as potential emergency running back options if they get to that point. And I think that about wraps it up for this one. We're going to be back again, like I said, next week, and I got a couple guests lined up to be on the show, and we'll be hitting game week Monday. Obviously, Mike Elko and players are expected to address the media to kind of kick off the week, and then it's off and running from there with Notre Dame next Saturday at 6:30 p.m. on ABC. College Game Day will be in town. Going to be a huge week for A&M overall. So thanks to everybody for joining us on this edition of the Gig'em 24/7 Sports Podcast. If you're not a subscriber, be sure to subscribe to the channel to get a notification every time a new video drops. Like and share the video. It helps us out a lot. And until then, have a great weekend, everybody. Enjoy the week 0 games, and we'll see you guys soon. Thanks again.